God, what a...
He is the grandfather of security, and Roger Shell, who is also here, is nodding his head in agreement.
Another grandfather.
And you've all heard about Jim in your classes. He was on Tiger teams that did security analysis in the 1960s and has been hard at work trying to improve security architectures ever since then. And today he is going to talk about the application of high assurance systems to support label process in high volume in archive
You can read it.
environments.
You can do it. Thank you, Cynthia. Just to keep things straight, it is true that I've been working at all these problems for a long time, and I haven't gotten it right yet, so I have to keep doing it. That's what I'm told anyway. The problem I want to talk about today is a real one, in fact, and there are any number of large government agencies, things like the Department of Defense and State Department and people like that, who have 50 to 60 years worth of classified data laying around in archive storage in one form or another. And the one agency at least is talking about wanting to, in the next 3 to 5 years, substitute the manual review and the manual processing of data that leaves their agency to the rest of the world and automate it. They want to improve the flow of data. And there's a considerable congressional pressure on the defense-related industries to justify their high budgets and their large staffs by making more better. It's not always clear that more is better, but more and better information available to the policy people that supposedly make the decisions in our government. So the problem is here are agencies who haven't had any formal way of doing this. They've had manual means. In other words, I can write a report in some of the agencies, and if one of my report is done, I'll take it to my supervisor, say, Roger. Roger reviews it and says it's okay. I might do a couple of iterations if I don't get it all right the first time. But eventually, between him and me, we come to an agreement that this document, whatever it is, ought to be able to go out of the place. We establish what the real classification is, even though we're often in a top secret environment to start with. Most of the stuff that goes out is not top secret. It's only secret. Sometimes it's less than that. But the process is an author, somebody writes something or collates something or creates a document by stringing together things that they have, makes adjustments to it to take out any of the really sensitive materials so that you can treat it at a lower classification level, and has the data reviewed by a second party, and then the data is sent out. There are, in some organizations, a highly stylized process that does that sort of thing. It's not just anybody does these things. You go through a variety of stages, but essentially the process is something like that. Well, that's good as long as the volume's not too high. If you're really in the business of keeping your data rather than giving it away, it's fine. You can have a couple of people making these decisions, and it's not too good. Now, all of a sudden, particularly with Congress and everybody saying we got to get more for the money we're spending in these kinds of business, there's an impetus to try and do different things. Hence, the problem comes up to try and do something that's never been done before, and that's to automate the process and at some point be able to use guards and things the equivalent of to control the flow of data to various customer groups, various customer places on networks. I don't have to tell you that the world is networked, and I can assure you the U.S. government is no less networked than the world. The problem is that while they're networking with each other, and wires are being strung from building to building and things of this sort, the security issues that raises are not being given the same consideration. So anyway, that's the problem we're trying to deal with. Basically, there's two parts of the problem, as it's always been. The first, at some point, they want to be able to handle access control issues because they're putting up databases where the customers that use the database are not in a particular owner's organization. The customer may, in fact, be, for example, the Department of Defense might have a database, and all of a sudden they're sharing that database with the State Department and a few other people who are not ordinarily Department of Defense users. So you have a problem of being able to control access from outside of an organization as well as the usual controls that you're concerned about with inside. Inside, they sort of wave their hands and say, well, gee, everybody's cleared to some level in this organization. We don't have to worry too much. They're all our people, and we reinvestigate them periodically and that sort of thing. And that seems to satisfy people for a fair degree. But as soon as you start introducing other agencies about whom you don't know what their practices are with respect to how they do their clearances and how often they reinvestigate their employees, your assumptions that gave you some comfortable feeling about security are sort of crumbling because you don't know these other people. Multiply the State Department by 10 or 15 and the real world comes out. That's really what the problem is. Even Congress gets access on a routine basis to classified information from the executive branch that just was virtually unheard of, I think, when we started the business. It wasn't that it didn't happen, it's just that it didn't happen in an institutionalized and relatively high volume way that is happening today. And it's going to, and Congress wants it to be more. They want to know about everything that the executive branch is doing. They want to know what the intelligence agencies know. They want to be able to micromanage is the word I would use, things that they probably ought not to be micromanaging, but since they control the budget, they can get people's attention, and that's part of what we're doing. So there's the access control aspect of it. There's always been the data movement problem. You know, when I have data in an agency that's at a certain classification level, and I want to send it out, I want to be able to use my guards to help control how I move that data about. So what we need to do, and what we and what all the other agencies are trying to do, is establish systems of labeling. And I give you a definition of it up here. And mostly what I want to emphasize with the system of labeling is the fact that it's not just putting labels on data, but it's also what do we do with the labels? How do we interpret them? What do we use? How do we use them to control the flow? Or how do we use them to control the access? So we have a variety of reasons why we want to put the, and everybody sort of understands this. I'm not telling you things that are brand new. The main brand new part of it is the fact that the agencies all of a sudden now see that they want to automate the processing, if you will, of the approvals for either access or for data flow. This table sort of says what I want to do. I want to create and associate labels you can read on down for all these kinds of things. This happens to be a particular organization that uses Microsoft Office products. They have Lotus Notes as their internal email sort of thing. They have databases on Lotus Notes, which are used very extensively for operational databases of one kind or another. There are other databases, Oracle and that sort of thing, that are around. Not trusted Oracle, it turns out, but just sort of standard garden variety Oracle. There's very little trust. There are virtually no trust elements in these systems. And then objects created by various kinds of collaboration tools. And the only reason I'm not specific about this is I haven't got a clue, and the collaboration tools are just sort of now rising to the fore, and everybody's very excited about them because it shows that we're using our money more effectively because we're working together. I haven't seen any results yet, but I mean, that's the theory. And so we have that. We want to use the labels for access control to all those things, and we also want to use them for data movement control. So those are the two, and those have always been what we've been about. What are some of the issues? Well, what do we do about handling currently unlabeled databases? I have databases with no labels at all on them. I happen to know that it's a secret database because of the subject matter, but there's nothing on the data that would indicate that it's secret. People just throw things sort of willy-nilly in the database, and because local custom tells you if you're a new person there that database is secret and so forth. There's no label even on it. So anyway, what do we do about unlabeled databases, and what do we do about these archives where there may be a label, but it's a notional label. It's something like that, if you've ever, maybe you haven't. But for example, State Department cables are classified, and they have in the classification they have something that says SECRET with a space between it, so that you don't get something that says secretary and suddenly have a big fit about how it works. So they're labeling on the telegrams. When it was paper, I'd take a telegram, I'd decide what the classification was. I'd go to my supervisor, whoever it was, he'd sign off and say, yeah, that's a good one, and take it down to a communications room where somebody would look at it and just copy it into a teletype, or later they got document readers and would just send the whole thing out almost as a fax over appropriate lines. The label was on the piece of paper, and that was adequate. Now, I'm sitting composing my documents on PCs. I'm networking to my supervisor. He gets a copy. He does something and says, yeah, it looks pretty good. And he forwards it. And again, there's nothing that binds the labels to the object that we're trying to send around. So the question of binding things has become now very important. So even if I have a label on the document, I have to go and review it and say, is this label still applicable? And if it is, then what can I do to make certain it gets stuck on there? We'll come back to that one in a bit. In the access areas, high assurance access, again, we're worrying more and more about people who are not part of your organization, although you really ought to worry about the people in the organization as well. But the outside people are the ones who are causing the focus at the moment, and they're being given access to databases that are maintained and owned by you. Depending on the paranoia of the organization, you may in fact you would have the database inside the walls, so to speak. A lot of times they put the database, I'll see if I get it right, on the property, but outside of the logical wall of the organization, if you will. It's sort of I have a big high fence around my property, I have a building in here, and that's where the good stuff is. And then I have things out and put out in the lawn between the building and the fence, sort of stuff. The logical equivalent of that in an electronic database, sort of thing. And finally, the problem of data movement within a domain, within an organization. Today, there are no controls there are no logical controls. I can move data in the agencies I work in. I can go and write stuff, move it around within the agency. There's nothing that prevents me from sending data off to databases to other people like that. And there's certainly no labels that are valid in that regard. The problems, of course, are that there's very sensitive data over which there are no controls. And so now when I have an environment with sensitive data floating around with other things that are not quite so sensitive, my concern is in 3 years or 5 years when everybody says, well, now we've got these firewalls protecting ourselves, how do we know that the good stuff is staying in and only the authorized stuff is going out? Okay, where are we? Next one. Series of requirements. These requirements are, some of them are real in that people are trying to build systems using the requirements, and they come from a group of people in the organizations that are called records management officers. And the governments are, they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. They collect all this data, and now they have to keep meticulous records about the data, and you don't want to destroy data because sometimes it's evidence in citizens are suing the government because somebody got killed or injured at some place or another, and the government records are are required for legal purposes. So there's a whole series of laws about how the executive branch agencies, all of them, must in fact maintain and support records. And when you come to the intelligence and the defense community, they're not immune from these things, so they have to keep the records in a sensible way. The requirements are mostly those requirements that are derived from the records management people. The security people have not weighed in, if you will, very much, but you'll see that the records management people did a pretty good job in some of these areas. We can hit the next one. Nothing surprising or spectacular in these requirements. The question of whether you have a classification log attached to a document as it's being created or not is an invention. Nobody has really said, yes, that's a good idea or a bad idea, but the fact is, when you're doing a document or when you're doing a report or something of that sort, you may not have the classification completely worked out. You start off and you say, well, gee, maybe it's secret. Well, maybe it's unclassified. Well, I'll start off unclassified and see if any secret stuff creeps in. And you're writing away, and you suddenly discover, well, I think that's confidential, and you'll mark it. Well, as far as any record system goes, it looks like it's confidential. Well, you go on with a document, and often do not get down to putting the final classifications until you've gone through and looked at each paragraph and decided what part's what. And so there's a nominal classification that you'd like to start recording as soon as you can, but it's not likely to be fixed. So you got to allow for the fact that I've done a document and now I've reviewed it and I say, gee, I overclassified it, or gee, I underclassified it, I want to raise it. Well, the raising you might think is no big deal, but also the lowering it, if that's appropriate, should not be a big deal either. So one of the things you want to be able to do is allow the user to do changes, but you might want to make a record of the fact what these changes are. Maybe it only shows one entry. It says, well, I changed it from, was it nominal confidential to unclassified, and I did it on such and such a date. Or it may be that I'm conflicted, and I have no idea what the hell the thing is. And I start off secret, and I go down to unclassified, and go back up to confidential, and I go back down, and up and down, and it shows my indecision. But at least there's a record somebody could look at. And I think the idea of logging what you're doing as these changes are, so you append the changes as you make them, somebody can go back and look and say, what was your problem here? Or they can say, oh, okay, somebody had a problem here. Maybe I ought to look at it a little more carefully. You ought to, portion classifications are something that we've had around, that have been the requirements for as long as I've known about classified data. You're supposed to mark paragraphs and so forth with the appropriate classification, and you ought to make changes to that, and that also ought to be, changes to the portion classification ought to be maintained in the classification log. Most of this stuff is the kind of thing, for example, if I'm making a Word document and I have a save feature in it, I want to be able to record the data, the classification of the data I'm saving, even just for backup purposes. Because if I don't do it, it'll never get done, and therefore you really need to be able to have it. The question of when you bind the labels to the document is a key idea. We haven't talked about the mechanism we're going to use yet. But one of the problems that you have is you can imagine systems where people are putting labels on it, but if you don't bind the labels to the data, you might as well not bother making them. And in fact, I will talk a little bit later about a real system that has a mandatory labeling policy, but it's not a mandatory security policy because they make you put labels on data, but they never use it for anything. And you can change them, and you can take them away, and you can ignore them completely. And unless you can make any changes, but you have abided by the letter of some law, totally violating the spirit of it. So I mean, you know, every time I put the classification on one of these things, I'm saying to myself, why? Why are we doing this? Nobody's used it. Nobody, you know, and as much as anything else, it says that if I'm sending an email or something like that, and I know it's secret, I can label the secret on it, and you look at it and say, oh, you labeled it secret, but you're not required to do anything with it. Once I've sent it, it's as though it's gone, and you can essentially electronically cut the secret off the top and bottom of the thing and treat it as unclassified, print it out as unclassified, and there's nothing that enforces that thing at all. And then all the other sort of motherhood kinds of things that we'd love to have, self-protecting, whatever that means, which means we'd like the labeling to be under some kind of trusted system. The user requirements, which are, I guess, next on. Okay, we're getting near the end of the user stuff here. Right. The idea that you might, record. Where am I? Is that a user? I'm still in system requirements. I'm sorry. Okay. They're all fairly standard things. Nothing new or exciting. Give me the user ones. Keep forgetting I had some more to put to my. Way to go. Okay, we said before, we want to be able to change the label, we want to be able to change the classifications and regrade material as necessary. Want to support cut and paste between documents because people are going to do that. And again, in an environment where I have no labels, it turns out cutting and pasting is very easy. There's no barrier. I can take out of the top secret document and put in a secret. And it turns out that you're not necessarily copying top secret stuff out. You're just making extracts for some report or something like that. You should be able to handle that sort of business. You want to be able to support portion marking, whether it's paragraphs or diagrams or whatever. And you want to be able to change portions or anything else. I mean, the whole idea is that the way people use the systems today is they create these documents and the classification doesn't really get assigned fully until the document is finished in some sense. So, you know, I'm done with it, I'm going to make it, and I want to pass it on. So you'd like to be able to let them have that freedom because they're living in a system high environment, but you also want to make sure that the labels get put on the documents in a way that when it finally leaves off, you know, I pick it up and pass it off somewhere, I have a chance of being able to use my guard to control the flow of that information or to control access to the document itself. And so we go on from there. Metadata is a term of art that the community of players that I'm working with are dealing with, and this again comes from the records management people. These are things that records management people, and this is only the security part. There's actually a document about this thick that's a tentative standard for this sort of thing, and it's got all kinds of things that have nothing to do with classification. It has more to do with when the document is created, and there's all kinds of tags you put on it to give somebody a clue as to what the subject matter is. And the records management people are the ones who the Congress, for example, every once in a while say, well, give me all the data you guys have collected on our activities in Colombia against drug lords. And they go to all the agencies. They go to the FBI, they go to the Department of Defense, they'll go to the intelligence agencies, they'll go to the State Department, anybody who might have possibly done that. And they do a clean sweep. And they might put some limits on and say, well, just give me the last 3 months or some specific time period or anything associated with a particular incident or event that occurred in there. But the point is that the records management people's job is to be able to respond to questions like that from Congress and people of that sort. So they want to organize this data, and they want to have some idea. Do we have telegrams or cables or messages that dealt with, we've directed our Army forces or the State Department people to do something. I want to be able to pull that stuff up and do it. So they'll have information about how what the document is. Is it a telegram? Is it a report? Is it photographs? Is it whatever the thing? And they'll also have information about the don't come to me. Don't tell me. They'll also have information about how the document, where the document is. Where can I find it? Because you don't just go to one big room and pull that document out. In most of these places, there may be, take a number you like, 20, 50 rooms, each one being run by some sub-fiefdom of the organization, and the information that you need in order to respond to this stuff may be scattered all over a large organization. So it'll tell you where to look. And it might tell you, in some cases, who wrote it or who was the principal writer of the thing. There's all kinds of ancillary information that is only vaguely related. We're only concerned about the classification parts. So the classification part of the metadata standard that they're being worked on is outlined here. It has all the usual things you would expect there, like classification, as a unclassified, secret, whatever. Was derived from is by what authority are you doing the classification? And again, the records management people care about that. As long as we have it, we figure why not? It's a good thing to have. What is the reason for the classification? Well, maybe I'm showing state of readiness of U.S. forces. Well, that might be a secret. I mean, that tells me right away the minimum classification I can have on that is a secret sort of thing. Or it might just, and for some of the reasons, and most places have sort of standard classification guides, they will tell you if the topic is this, the classification ought to be this. Minimum classification ought to be this. Now you can deviate from that, but you do so at some minor peril. And you might, your boss might say, "What are you doing?" sort of stuff. So most people take whatever the guide is as though it's written in stone, and it becomes a law rather than a guide. But the idea is to be able to say, now the mandatory, optional, and conditional was so. What are these things? What must be on various kinds of documents? All the mandatories must have that. Sometimes the things that are conditional, like the classification reason, if it's classified, I have to give a reason why it's classified, and I use a classification guide. And I say I mean anybody doing this sort of thing. Classified by is obviously me or whoever's the originator of the document. Things like code words, release to, and all that sort of thing are totally conditional. In some cases, there is no indication of who it ought to be supplied by. So you might say, well, gee, this release to stuff, if I have to do that, I'll be the one who supplies it, because no system is going to know that necessarily, at least none I've seen today. Non-U.S. classification markings are just that. Our government deals with a lot of other governments and classified stuff. So occasionally we have documents that were, say, originated by the Brits or originated by allied forces or coalition forces, depending on what we're doing. And so we might have markings that have no correspondence to anything in the U.S. system. There are some discontinuities like that. So they allow you to mark or require you to mark, show non-U.S. markings. We may have a U.S. marking that is close, we think, hopefully good enough to protect that and so forth. But the idea is you might have it. In fact, the request may say, well, give me all the non-U.S. documents, if you will, that deal with this particular topic, and it would help in that case. The declassify on is again, something that says, we don't want to have this stuff where I think we're now in a 25-year, anything older than 25 years automatically declassified unless somebody's made a big fuss about it sort of stuff. And we've seen that come and go. This is about the third time that I can recall that we've had sort of automatic declassification, and they had all kinds of systems for those things. The problem is, it's a good idea, but there are some things that will remain classified forever no matter how old they are, and for good reason. There are also a lot of things that should be declassified but will remain classified forever anyway, if it doesn't matter. I mean, it's a good idea. Periodically, you ought to clean the attic out, and that's what they're trying to do. Non-IC security markings, I'll give you two examples that I'm aware of. The State Department has something called limited official use only. They treat that as a big deal. It is roughly equivalent to what the old restricted used to be, if anybody is old enough to remember that or have heard that. It used to be that we had a classification that was above unclassified, but it wasn't confidential. It was called restricted, and a lot of things that we now treat as official use only were called restricted. But it was actually more than official use only. It was a true classification. You had to handle it that way. Well, State Department has this thing called a limited official use only, which sounds like an official use only thing, but they are treating it much more like a restricted kind of thing. Then there is another favorite is admin internal use only. These are per agency affectations is not the right word, but they're not anything that's given in the executive orders or anything like that. These are just things that the agencies have over the years used to provide controls of one kind or another, and the metadata allows the use of those things. That you can add those things in if it's appropriate for the thing. Again, the user has to know this and whatnot. The dissemination controls tell you essentially how you have to handle the document if you're floating around with it. Well, this is not a bad extended label idea, if you will. I mean, usually we think of classification as the only thing we care about, but in fact, in organizations, you have to worry about some substantial part of this. Maybe not every single item for everything that ever exists, but a lot of it is already there. So we're proposing essentially that we for every document that's created, that one of these things gets filled out automatically, attached to the document in some fashion, and that becomes a label that the guards will eventually use in trying to figure out whether or not to let something get out. That, obviously, depending on where we're going to put it. Where are we? Next thing up. Okay, now we have this big pile of stuff. What do we do with it? Well, one of the things we've been doing now very successfully for about 60 years, we don't do anything. I mean, why not? That's a good option. It's not gotten us trouble yet, well, not too much. And the nice thing about it, doesn't cost any money, and we can just ignore the problem. But we're not going to help the guy who wants us to push the things to the guards. So while it's an attractive option, a lot of people says, why are we bothering with this sort of thing? We keep saying, well, the boss said he wanted to do this stuff electronically in some reasonable period of time. And I said, oh, all right. Or the other thing we can do is the mandatory labeling policy. I mentioned there is a system where I have to put a label on every email I send internally that doesn't mean a damn thing. All right, and I can put attachments. Oh, the other thing is I can put attachments onto my email with a different label than the one that's on my email itself. So I often see, for example, an email that's unclassified, and that's what shows up on your screen. You open an attachment, and only if you're lucky do you see that the thing has been classified and has as a marking somebody edited it into a Word document, for example, or something like that. But there's no correspondence between the two of them, and if you're not careful, you might find yourself taking your secret attachment and doing something with it that's inappropriate. More frequently you find a document with no label at all on it, and yet by looking at the content of it, you say, dear Lord, what are these people doing here? Why am I getting this? And it turns out that the only label that you got was on the email, but the attachment itself has no label. So the email but there's no correspondence between the two. Complicating things in at least one agency that we're aware of is the fact that emails get classified sometimes by virtue of the fact that people's names appear in the address list. And some of the officers in the agencies are undercover and will always be, and therefore you classify the document because it says Roger Shell, and the fact that Roger Shell is an employee of that agency or something like that is a deep, dark secret because, well, how deep and dark, I don't know. But the idea is that what they want to be able to do is have people be assignable to posts and organizations outside the continental United States. It'd be a good idea sometimes not to have your name plastered all over NSA's phone book or something of that sort, whatever the drill is. So you have the ability to, you have confusing the issue is you classify documents because of addressees, not because of the content of the document or because of the content of the attachments, and it just gets all messed up. Anyway, a mandatory labeling policy really is more confusion than it is help. It really doesn't help very much that I can see. Final one, of course, is a mandatory security policy, which has the sort of thing that we would expect to have, that it is enforcing a organization-wide policy that says you're only allowed to send secrets here, you're only allowed to handle top secrets this way, and you're going to handle both data movement and access control with these labels. Within that, I think we have the next one. When do you do all this? Well, one thing I can do is go back and try and label 60 years accumulation of data, which would take an immense amount of money. Every once in a while, for one reason or another, they try to clean the attic out, and they take a lot of retired people, have them go and read telegrams or cables or whatever it is, reports and stuff, and try to decide whether they can declassify any of this stuff. And the idea is to try, they get remarkably little declassified. I mean, I guess you wouldn't be surprised, but it's not working as well as they'd like. So the retrospective labeling problem is just as bad. Now, I could take the label that's on a telegram and use that as the notional label right off the bat, but then I'm not sure that I'd be true to the congressional interest or the mandate that wanted me to do it in the first place. So the mandatory labeling policy, the idea of retrospective labeling, while a lot of people say it's great, so there's a job forever, and I don't ever have to get out. All I have to do is go and do these things, is a good idea. There is, in fact, a certain amount of that going on. Anyway, people are they're saying, well, we have this high activity database. Well, we can go in and we might actually be willing to spend the energy to get all the records properly electronically labeled so we could use these other measures to get out of it, sort of thing. Applied labels only when data is used, which is my favorite, because if I'm going and taking any of the historical data and using it as part of a report, or I'm attaching it to a report or something like that, is a reasonable time to say, well, I'll review the data and I'll bind the data when I attach it to my report, because I'm doing this to essentially just use the stuff. But nevertheless, it's an option that probably has more sense than anything else. It says everybody gets to play. You don't have to do it all at once. You do it as you use it, and that's probably not a bad thing to do. Finally, as an option, you can label finished work. Usually this means, all right, my report's finished, and we're going to send it out of the organization. Now, if my organization is a small activity within something else, anytime I have to go send something to a colleague in another group, might be the time when I get and bind the label, make sure the labels are straight and all that time. If I'm sending it to another agency, almost certainly I have to do that, because how else are they going to know? Although, as somebody pointed out to me when I was running this through a while ago, they said, what, the other agencies don't use labels, do they? And I said, well, That's not the problem. We have to use them because we're required to do something at the boundaries when we want to move our stuff out. If they're not going to play, I don't care. All I know is when I throw it out there, it is at least properly marked. Now, if you don't handle it properly, it's not my problem anymore. I think that's right. Well, whether it's right or not, I'm taking that stand. So anyway, labeling finished or transmitted work is one of the options that we're doing. What do we have left there? A diagram. My goodness. And thank you, Cindy. I'm going to now go ahead. I've got to stand here. Sorry, Cameron. I guess you've heard me talk from time to time about how we're doing things anyway. One of the things that's happening is we have thin clients over here, which are they're trusted in the sense that we haven't got one. Our intent is to have a trusted thin client, which will be trusted in the sense that it will only do thin client stuff. The thin client stuff means it will only display screens or encode keyboard and mouse movements back to a server where I have a terminal server there. The current, how can I say, functional capability is they're running thin client as an application on top of a NT terminal, which has absolutely zero anything you can believe about it. They're doing it in order to say, well, we're up and running, we're getting ahead of the game. We're saying that that's okay, but as soon as possible, within a year or so, we want to replace all may be too fast, but we want to replace them with something that we know is only doing the screens, the keyboard, and the mouse movements, and the drivers to make all that stuff. But I don't need all of NT. I don't need any of NT. And we think we can find thin clients that will have a controller rather than an operating system that will allow us to do that. And the only trust I have to have is that it doesn't have Trojan horses and it doesn't have any local persistent storage. And that I think we can do. We see that as a clear shot, although we don't have any vendor who is going to give us one today, but it's not a big deal.
Jim?
Come in.
When you say it only has a controller, do you mean it has a processor?
Yes, it has a processor because it's got to have something to run. It's got to have something that runs TCP/IP, for example, which still is the foundation protocol for moving data among the pieces. It has to run something called ICA protocol, which is the protocol that packages the screens at the terminal server and delivers them to the client. It's got to be able to package the mouse movements and keystrokes at the client back to the other one. There is another protocol that is flaky right now, but in fact the Citrix people, who are the ones who we've been talking to, but everybody else has one too, has something called an ICA Secure. They've got a crypto, an RC5 crypto layer that stands between the packetizing portion of the protocol and the actual transmission out on this wire here. All right. In truth, it's not clear that that is going to be adequate for our needs. But again, I've got 3 to 5 years, and maybe over that 3 to 5 years, I'll get a decent crypto protocol in there. It may be that the ICA protocol will evolve to that. They may very well see that there's enough market people care about it, and we will put some stuff. But what it looks like is they focused on how to do the thin client stuff, and somebody says, well, I care about the network, and oh God, I haven't thought about it. We'll quickly put something together, and they quickly did. We've talked to them, and they claim that there is no API, but that doesn't make sense to me either, because there is actually something I can get a thin client without this crypto function. And to get the crypto function, I buy a little piece of software and plug it in. So somehow there is a set of calls and entry points and stuff like that. And the guy says, I don't have any API. And I says, well, how do you do it? Randomized? You just make random calls and stuff like that? No. It's a little more organized than that. They don't. I think what it is that they don't want to fool around with it. That they would really like to. Now that they see there's a serious market for that sort of thing, I think they're now going to come to grips with the idea of building a real API and maybe making it whatever NIST comes up with in the AES area. My guess is, because that would not be bad either, because it's going to be fairly good, I think. Did you have a question, Jim?
Yeah, Jim. So You say that these thin clients won't have any storage area in them?
They'll have storage for, there's a screen buffer somewhere, and there's storage to be able to accumulate the keyboard items
What
and put them in a packet, right?
kind of processor, like a Pentium 2 kind of thing?
No idea, no idea. I don't know, but probably. Probably, right. The answer is I don't know, I really don't. And so I don't know what the answer is.
If it's going to be a processor like that, then the cache problem also go into that, it's a storage area.
Could very well. I mean, the idea is that you're not going to have 60 gigabytes of anything there that you can store stuff away. You're not even going to have I say you're not going to have 128 K. I don't know whether that's true or not either. The only thing I'm certain of at this point is that there is, notionally at any rate, and I think that the Citrix people have actually worked on a thin client that does not depend on NT or one of these larger behemoths in the way of operating systems, and just has the pieces necessary to make it do that function. Now maybe it's not Citrix, maybe it's one of there's a company called Netier, N-E-T-I-E-R, that has a thin client that has got a stripped down sort of thing. And Data General has a version of the same sort of thing. But I think the Data General one is built on some portions of it. Somebody said it was a stripped down NT. I don't know, it goes from 42 megs down to 24, something like that. I don't know how stripped down it is. Point is that it's probably not what we're going to want. But the idea is that we see it's at least feasible to think about it. And I know that we're pressuring the Citrix people to start with about what they consider finding one that has no NT base. We'll see. The proposition then is that these guys are running applications out of the terminal server. There's no application running here at all. This is you wouldn't remember, but Roger would. This is a Delta Data revisited completely. A little more fancy outside, but the idea is it was a pretty damn dumb terminal. It didn't do anything except it was driven by big IBM. Well, we don't have big IBMs anymore. We have terminal servers that are Data Generals and, I don't know, Hewlett-Packards and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we have network protocols now that we talk back and forth rather than the proprietary protocols that were used at the time Data Generals and the Delta Datas were being made. So we have here one of the properties that we think we can build in, and we expect to be able to build. And this is the crypto tunnel that is, if at the very worst, is the current thin client, the secure component to the thin client thing. That's the worst case that I can imagine to be. But we believe that we might be able to improve on that by some, and we think we will have help from people who will be able to help us with that sort of stuff. The dashed lines indicate that I can go from here to a terminal server. I can go to another type of server, which I'm going to call a trusted bindery, which I will get to in a minute. There is a guard here that controls me going out to a network over here that I'm running. There's an application running, the terminal server, that may go through that guard or may go through a gateway of some sort to let me get data over here. The guard's set up as though I'm actually going to move data out from here through him, and he's going to check to make sure that the only things that get out of this high network are things that are approved, that the label recognize the labels, that the labels are authorized, and that it's authorized that I can send secrets, let's say, to this place here. So, and that's what I expect this guard to do. Now, from what I've told you so far, what I have inside of this environment with various types of database servers and terminal servers and so forth is I have some data with labels that I've put on. But that doesn't mean anything because I really can't trust this terminal server. It's not a trusted element, and it could be changing the labels or it could be ignoring the labels or whatever. I can, however, set up a path between me and here and force the terminal server to send to this bindery, which is a trusted element, a copy of the data that I want to send. Now, he might not send me the data that I expect, but it is my responsibility, since I can hook my inclined to hear, I can read that data. Now, this bindery has to have the ability not only to let me see the nominal document that I see, but make sure that there is no hidden text, there's all this sort of thing. And the programs that we'd have to run out of the bindery, the one I see simple, I think, relatively speaking, is I should be able to do simple text files. I don't know if there is such a thing as simple text files anymore, but at least I should be able to do that. What happens when I get to photographs or audio or a whole bunch of other stuff where the form of the document is not something that I can look at and see whether or not it is? Well, if I suspect steganography, I might do things like do statistical analysis of the document and see, am I getting any anomalous distributions that I shouldn't have? You know, should these lower bits be filled up with a strange pattern of stuff? That's where usually you stick data. So I can do some kinds of filtering in that way and say, this looks very funny. I'm not gonna send it out. You know, I can err on the side of conservatism. And if I really am desperate to get it out, I can always print the damn thing out and carry a picture over to somebody and say, that's what I wanted to send you, but I couldn't send it out electronic. So I can get the stuff out, but I can also automate some of it by using the bind report function to essentially do whatever checking is feasible to do. Do I run a risk that the bindery is going to miss something? Almost certainly do. Is it a big risk? That remains to be seen. I think maybe not, but you know, and if I were explaining this to somebody, I'd say, here's what I understand it to do. You tell me whether you're willing to accept that risk. If you're willing to accept the risk, it's better than we're doing what we can, and at some point where we can't do any more than that. So if you really don't believe that, then we're going to have to manually do all this sort of thing, and that's okay. I mean, that's somebody's decision to do. Are you raising your hand at me, John?
Yeah.
Raise it louder.
Okay. You said processing pictures and, you know.
Right.
What kind of pictures like you're talking about? Like, you know, like
Video?
predefined.
Video?
Yeah, video. Because my idea is like, can't you just, you know, you produce this multimedia stuff somewhere, right?
Yes.
Yes. Maybe you can put something trusted there, and it'll checksum it.
I might be able to do that. That's true.
So that,
And
trusted binder can always control the checksum.
I might be able to do that. That is true. But what I've been thinking, the model I had really is that I'm cutting and pasting pictures from like magazines, the equivalent of magazines, but documents otherwise that may or may not have had that done to it. Remember, I've got most of my stuff here is not marked at all. And the first time we're not only I'm marking new stuff that I'm creating here, and I'm using the bindery to make certain that the labels are bound to it. Now, I'm authorized, one of the things if I'm doing the bindery business, I certainly want to be able to do is say, oh, you know, I'm bound to stuff. Hell, you know, I didn't do it right. I gotta change it somehow. If I'm doing paragraph markings, I may want to change paragraph marks. If I'm doing document markings, I may have undermarked the document. But the bindery has the ability then to build a checksum, and I will have what amounts to a labeling certificate. The only purpose of it is to be able to put my signature on that document, and now at least we have some documents that have labels and that are signed by the author, okay, which is part of my metadata stuff. I still don't have a document that won't necessarily get out of here, because now we have the question of how am I going to get the thing approved? For some period of time, and I don't know whether it's going to be a few years, few days, few months, few decades, we're going to run the systems with second-party review. Okay, we may make everybody able to write. Well, just anybody can create draft telegrams or draft cables, but only a handful of people are authorized to release them, acting on behalf of the organization. So, same way, anybody can propose that this document be released, and I've labeled it properly, and I can now fire this off to my second-party reviewer. Tim, lucky guy, gets to do this. And he can look at my document, and he can look at the document, and where he looks at it, by the way, is the bindery again, because he has to review the document in the same way I created it. He has to look to see if there are hidden files. He has a way of checking my signature, and he can say, that looks like, yes, that's Jim's signature. And when he's satisfied, and we both are satisfied with the document, then he can sign it. And now, at the Guard, I have a Guard that only releases documents addressed, you know, if say it's a secret document, this guy's authorized secret, it's got to meet that, and it's got to be signed by a authorized releaser. In this case, Tim is it. In a real organization, I might have 3 people. You depending on how your organization is set up, what your trust models are, it might be that it just has to be another party, just anybody. You know, Roger and I are office mates. I created a document. I said, Roger, would you please review my document? He'd sign off on it, and vice versa. I'm not sure I'd sign Roger's, but I mean, he might be fool enough to sign mine. No, not in a million years. Well, Cynthia might. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, I presume that this is a near-term solution to certain problems. Has anyone looked at the possibility of using something like a multi-level database to compose these documents that have
No.
multiple markings on them, so that you use effectively symbolic links
Out
to
of here. No.
pull it together?
The answer is no. They haven't.
Wouldn't that be an idea?
Yes, it'd be an idea. And I'm not sure how easy it would be to sell, to be honest with you. I mean, I think it's a good idea, but I don't think it gets out easily enough.
Well, you could create views then, and there could be an internal view and then a view that you would let out the door, for example.
Right. I think that would make people so nervous that they wouldn't let it happen. Remember, they're used to handling concrete things. And if I say I want to send a document, I want this document sent out, that's what they don't want something that can be one thing in-house and another thing outside, even though you and I know that that's possible. They want the assurance, I guess, of having one piece of paper. In effect, they'd like to be able to print out, this is what we're going to do, it's what we're going to send, and there's not 2 versions, it's it. There's nothing else. So,
Well, it would be 2 different documents, the 2 different views.
yeah, that would bother them. I didn't say this is rocket science we're working with here. I mean, these are bureaucrats who are doing their best, but they're not experienced, I guess is the word, enough in this area. And they're not people who would you know, it would be a 3-year sell to get the idea seriously considered, and with a high probability to get rejected at the end. And that's being straight up. And based on a 12-year sell that we still haven't concluded on something else. So anyway, the claim is, and obviously there's a lot of problems. The problems are, what do I do outside of simple text documents? Can I build a viewer for Word, for example, which is something I should be able to put my arms around. It's not that big a deal. And Roger's saying no, and I tend to agree with him. I don't think I can. But you know, that's bad enough. Then when I want to put Word plus diagrams or photographs or anything like that, you know, I'm back to square one. I think I can do with photographs and stuff. I think I can do some testing for steganography that would detect some. I won't say all. Would detect some. Now, is anybody going to be dumb enough to use the ones that I can detect? Probably not. Roger's not. But you know, but it is about where the thing is. It's really a hard problem. You know, the difficulty is that the manual methods aren't going to make it. They're just not. And what's going to happen is people are going to take and they're going to use something not as good as this actually and push the stuff out the door. I'm not saying this is that great, but they're not even going to do this much at it. And so they're going to be in the interesting position, I think, of closing their eyes and throwing it over the transom, hoping it lands on somebody they know or something they know. That's all I have. Oh, one other thing. It's simple enough, in my simple text case at any rate, that I can do paragraph marking down here, and I can decide what the proper document classification is by just going through and looking to see what is the highest high water mark as I go through my paragraph marks, and would detect things that I didn't mark because I was too lazy or didn't have any idea what to do. So that was another possibility. And if I were going to do paragraph marking, I would do paragraph marking and put the checksum on each paragraph. It turns out it's not that bad. It doesn't look ugly. Well, a little bit ugly, but not really ugly. But it's not again, I don't think we're going to get that far, but you can try to carry on a conversation we had at lunch. Okay?
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you all.